Hello, my name is Mark Yantzi. I worked for years with Community Justice Initiatives, and I'm involved in various restorative justice related projects at the present time. I want to tell the story of the Elmira case. I first knew that that was a case of interest when, in the early 90s, I was at a restorative justice conference in Minnesota. And at the opening, they had a sort of a social time in which we were kind of meeting new people. And I met this one gentleman who said, "Hello, my name's Hans Bosserup. I'm from Denmark." And I said, "Oh, I'm Mark Yantzi. I'm from Kitchener, Ontario." He said, "Kitchener, Ontario, the Elmira case." And that's when I got a bit of an inkling how far this story had spread. And so I wanted, in these few minutes, tell you a bit about my version of that story. I was a volunteer with Mennonite Central Committee and was assigned to work in the probation office to find ways to have volunteers from the churches get involved in working with persons who had offended. And so we started various projects, and there was but more importantly, there was a group of people, lay people from various churches and various community people, who we would get together periodically and we would talk about the justice system, which was quite a weird structure from my reading of it, just not being used to that structure at all. So I was working in that system, and once in a while we'd get together and we'd brainstorm and hear how people were doing with their volunteer placements and so on. And at one point, as a probation officer, I was asked to do a report on 2 young men who had gone through the town of Elmira, slashing tires, smashing windows, 20 counts of willful damage. So I, as a probation officer, got the request to do the report on these 2 guys. So that night, I just happened to have a meeting with this group of volunteers, and in the course of the discussion as we were brainstorming, I told them about these guys who had done all this damage in Elmira, and I said, wouldn't it be neat to have these 2 guys meet their victims? It was a safe thing to say in a group like that, and everybody said, yeah, that's a great idea. But of course, then my probation officer hat kicked in and said, oh no, we can't just do this. We have to get permission. The court is seized of this. This would be contempt of court if we interfered in this process. So we talked about it, and you know, it could have died there, because you have these great discussions, then everybody goes back to their jobs. But Dave Worth was worked with MCC at that point, and he was one of the people that I would connect with, and remember him raising, you know what, maybe we should do something about this. And so I said, well, I don't really know if I could, how to do it, but I thought maybe I could do an addendum to the pre-sentence report. So that's what I did. I wrote a pre-sentence report on this person, giving a family background, some of the facts on the 2 of them, the 2 men, young men, and I put an addendum on the back in which I said I thought there could be some therapeutic value from having these 2 young men meet their victims. So I sent it in to the judge ahead of time, and as it was a tradition then, I would go into the judge's chambers before court on that day when he'd read the report and to see if he had any questions. Well, he had a question about this. He said, oh, this addendum you have here about meeting their victims, I don't know if I can do that. And then he said something about, you know, maybe I don't know if there's any precedent, you know, and in law that's always a big thing, is having a precedent, which kind of says if something hasn't been done before, how does a new idea ever really get in? I mean, that's one of the ironies of the situation. So anyway, he said, oh, said something about looking for a precedent, and we went off and sat in the courtroom, waited for him to come in. And when he came in, he ordered that in the company of Dave Worth and myself, we should go and meet each one of the victims. Take these 2 men to meet each one of the victims and find out what the damage was, what was covered by insurance, and what the victim was out of pocket. So we had our assignment. You know, the interesting thing about that was, though, that the judge really had no authority in law to make that order. There was nothing in the criminal code that allowed for a judge to order an offender to meet a victim, which you'd think is really what it's all about, is problem solving, but it shows you how bureaucratic the system has become and how it's isolated people in various sides. So So we, anyway, we went around and we talked to all the victims and got the information, and went back to court, and then got to implement it, and then once they had time to repay the amounts that they had to pay, and so we went back again around the second time. And now, you know, there's a lot of emphasis put on preparation of people ahead of time. This, we just went to each one of the door, and they knocked, and we stood back with our clipboards to take notes, as good researchers do, I guess. And and they said, we're the fellows that slashed your tires or broke your windows or whatever they did at that particular place. And they, people would be surprised the first time, but generally they were civil, and they had some complaints about the way that one guy had his car parts were from, had to come from Sweden, all kinds of issues that this had led to. But the second time we came around, they came again to the same place, and they had checks for the amount that they were owed. And so that was really a much more comfortable exchange. And I remember one guy said to the one fellow, said, what did you say your last name was again? He said it, and he said, oh, are you related to so-and-so? Oh, yeah, he's my uncle. Oh, he's your uncle. Oh, I used to play hockey with him. Well, any offender who has a uncle that plays hockey can't be all bad. So you got a sense that they were kind of making connections with each other, and we're really working it out in a way that helped to kind of bind them back in the community. And somebody said, I remember another guy said, you know, if you ever walk down this, if you ever see me walking down the street in Elmira, be sure to say hi, because we're square now. You know, you've made it right. But the one woman I really remember was a woman who had lived in her house. She was born there, had grown up, had gone away to teachers college and was a teacher, then got married and moved back with her husband. He had died about a year before they threw a brick through the picture window, and she described how that had shattered her worldview. She had never locked her doors, never felt unsafe, but suddenly she couldn't stay alone in her house, and her grandchildren would come and stay with her because she was so frightened by that brick coming through the window. And then she said, and now I sit across from you, and I see that I really had no reason to be afraid, because, you know, you remind me just of my grandson. If he ever did anything like this, I'd really like him to do this, to be responsible like you are, and make it right. So and then she said, I've got $100 here in restitution that they'd paid, $50 each for the deductible on her insurance, and she said, I'm going to use this to help someone else. So there was a sense in which it was kind of being carried on. It had been crime is something that harms people, but if out of in the addressing of crime we can make things better for everyone, we've really been restorative in what we do.